have here are the components that you'd find in a box. So we basically unwrap them and they're ready to assemble. First thing we'll do, we'll put the beam together. So you need a flat surface, and we'll line them up in line, and we'll sleeve the little inserts into each other and put together. So we've just lined them up. We've put one slightly offset to the other. You'll notice the decals, wire at the end, danger, keep clear. This side, the CE safety sticker over here, and the Turbosawmill main logo over here. So this is our older insert tongue, and they work really well. They'll have a sort of spring in here, and you take these off, sleeve them in, and you tighten up. So we've improved the inserts a little. This is the new one, so it's got these actual special built extruded inserts. The only thing that you'll need to be aware of is that if you do have these new style inserts, you've got to drill the little the hole down here, the three little holes, offset around 3/8 of an inch or 10 millimeters this side. Otherwise, your tap will run right through that gap there. Whereas the older style, obviously, doesn't matter. We need a variety of spanners. So we've got 213, 16, 17, 18, 19. A rattle gun would come in handy with some sockets. So here I've got a 10, 13, 17, and 19. An Allen key set. And the packet that come with the machine. So you've got these little M8 screws. We were using M6, but we've just upgraded them to M8 just to make them a little bit more foolproof. You've got a pilot and a 6mm drill bit to do the process there. We'll just slide these little tongues in here. They slide in very easy, so you wouldn't need any sort of lube or anything. So just slide them in. Grab your two nuts here and line the holes up. Right, so now we're just going to sleeve them together. So just a matter of aligning the beam up as true as you can and lining the little pockets up. Pretty easy to get through. Make sure they're all in. There we go. And just sleeve them together. All the way. There you go. We'll put the nuts in. Lock this up nice and tight. So a bit of CRC on each hole, and remembering that we're going to drill offset 3/8 of an inch so that it doesn't go through that gap of the new inserts. So you would have been supplied an M8 tap, so we're just going to put an extra little bit of CRC here, and then just use the same drill, and tap through. So we're going to apply a little bit of Loctite on every screw. You don't want to strip these, but you do want them tight. There you go. Probably a small Allen key that size would be ideal. That way you can't over tighten it, and you can get enough torque just by hand. So I've just looked down at my eye, and I've realized that I've got a little bit of negative camber. So what I've done is I've just loosened up these 4 bolts here, put a board under it, and just push both sides down a little bit. So it's just given me a little bit of a crown to it. And I'm talking like 1/2 mil gap here, or even 1/4 of a millimeter. So yeah, that's how you adjust it. Got our little crown here. Bit of CRC for every little hole. Boom, 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 boom. And then 6.5 5mm drill bit here, high speed. Desea before you tap. Give it a little bit of a clean, like so. To dab a Loctite on every screw. And again, you probably only Loctite one side if you're having to remove it. And also you'll notice that we have some screws along here that you can install and along the back side. But I wouldn't bother about that unless you're wanting to put this together permanently. It's a lot of screws to take out when you split the beam. What you can also do too is the side that you're having permanent, I've just drilled and tapped all the way through and Loctited, but on the side that you're having to remove, what you can do is once you've taken it apart, drill out these holes to an actual 8mm so that there's no thread going through the actual beam and then into the tongue. It'll tighten up nicely. Whereas over here it's just the dowel, doesn't matter. Over here, because you're taking it on and off, these top holes should be oversized, as well the bottom. It does pay to get these nice and tight as well, but not too tight. Let you strip the aluminium. So that's your beam. This is probably not the hardest, but the longest job. So once that's together, you're done. It all gets easier from this point on. So we're putting together the operator in-frame kit now. So you'll need a winch, an upright slider, a diagonal, the base skid with the two studs at the end, a foot sizer, the L-shaped hand crank unit, a chain, the bottom T-frame. There's a left and right to this, so this is the operator end unit. You've got a left and a right foot there. So what we do is we screw this skin in to the other side like that. Take your foot sizer over here. This can actually go in your bag for now. Just take this as the little repeat sizer. Take that off, and that just stays right there. Slide that out over there and stick that in here. And now bring that like that. So the next stage is we take those little nuts off and we put the feet so that the chain, see the hole here? The chain runs through there to the other side and connects onto this foot here. So we've got that together now. Now we're going to put the L-shaped bracket. So we'll take these bolts off, like so. That simply locates like that. So put this top bolt in like this. And this long bolt goes through the bottom with a spacer that goes through the end, right through that gap here. Right, tighten this up. Remember the bottom one has a little nut, a big nut through there to take out the gap. Right, so that's on. Roll that out there like that. And goes over this sprocket like this. This side goes through the gap and around the scraper. It connects onto the con link over here. And this goes through the gap here and connects to the hole over here. So we're going to tension up the chain so that the slack is taken out of it. So there's a little bit of springing. You don't want to over tighten it, but just enough so that there's no slack in the chain. There is one other component that we forgot to include, and that is the post here. That just sleeves through here like this. Collects the tube like that. This little unit here is a frame stabilizer, so when you've got it in position, you can tighten up this bolt and it sandwiches this unit onto that unit. So it just gives it a little bit more rigidity. Now there's two positions here. It's positioned for an 8-inch machine now, and that's how they come standard. So for a 6-inch machine, which we're building right now, this hole here needs to locate to that hole there. So it gives you another 2 inches of depth for the 6-inch. So basically we're going to take that bolt out, slip it down, and reconnect it to there. If it's an 8-inch, it's already set up for an 8-inch. And what it is the blade tilts roughly 2 inches below the horizontal surface. So you don't want to be pivoting the unit over the skid. Done. And then we'll tighten this clamp up here, which is going to give that rigidity that you need. So that's the clamp, nice and solid now. So the next stage is the slider, the vertical slider. Now this supports the beam. So all you need to do is sleeve it over the post here, put it into position. Now a little hint, it'll sit there as it is, but it's a little bit risky. If it pivots over a little bit, it's going to fall on the ground. You don't want that. So my suggestion would be to screw a nice board on one side of the machine so it gives you that support when you set this up out remotely. Okay, now we're going to put the winch kit on. Now this little sizer here needs to be facing this way, away from the chain. So we're going to position that onto the post, like so. Right, and then we'll tighten this arrangement up. So now we need to tighten this up. Nice and tight. So double check that. It's nice and tight. Oh yeah. Right, so I've just installed the little repeat stopper. Now this is for sizing the same sort of dimensions over and over. And there's little holes here, and this little rivet locates into the hole. You need to tighten it up pretty tight, and that'll stop to that point every time. So the last thing here is the diagonal. That locates to the M8 up here, and then locates down to this bolt right here. Leave that loose, and then we'll tighten the bottom one. There's a nut on the inside. You're going to wind out, hold your spanner this side, nail that on, and then tighten the two top bolts. Right, so now we're going to put together the other end frame. So this time we've actually remembered to include the vertical post here. So with the vertical post, the diagonal, the base skid, the upright slider, the little T-frame, the 2 feet, the winch, the chain, and the other L-shaped bracket without the hand crank. So just as before, this unit sleeves through the skid here. So that goes in like that. You're not going to need the sizer because that's only used at the operator end. So we'll just put the 2 feet on. And again, the chain runs on this side, screw the scraper up the arm to the other leg, so chain this side. Put that side on. And just as before, you can screw a board on it, a wide board, so it can hold it stable while you assemble the thing. But we're not going to bother this time around. Right, and then we want to put the L-shaped bracket on, and that goes like that. Same deal, same spacers. So remembering there's a little nut as a spacer here, and we'll just round these up. And from that point, we'll put the post on. This post here. Sleeve that through here. And again, this little slider here needs to be located onto the bottom hole for the 6-inch model. It's set at the moment for the 8-inch model. And then we tension the chain. Just tight enough to take the slack out of it, but not too tight. Right, last thing is the diagonal. Look at that diagonal on the top hole here. Washer and nut. And then locate the diagonal down here on the nut head side, right here. So position the operator frame at that end and the other end at this end. I've removed the 4 bolts here. So now I'm going to lift that end of the beam up, position it in place, bolt the bolts together, and then I'll lift the beam up and position on that frame there. Put that there, and we put the bolt here, put it back in that, so it can't come out. Now you don't want to over tighten these, just enough to lock it down inside here. If you over tighten it, it's going to end up crushing the alloy. That'll be a little bit of a locator. So I can just lift this beam up now like this, and until it pops in there like that. Put the washer and the nut on. So once again, don't over tighten, just enough to nip it up, because you will crush the aluminium if you do it too tight, like using a rattle gun or something like that. It is right next to a web, but it can only take so much. Right, so the beam is now locked. So the next part is to get the tubes that link one into the other for your sideways winding. But before you do that, you want to make sure that they're both the same distance across from the skid. So I just wind this over until it comes to a stop. This is the tubes, so you get 2 lengths of aluminium tube, 2 clamps, and a joiner. So we position one tube in here like this, just let it sit. Joiner, half on, slide the joiner off, position that there, sleeve the joiner both of them. Then you do the 13 and rattle back. We'll tighten these up. Tighten the in clamps on. Right, so you may need to loosen these chains a bit because that's how the shaft is positioned once everything's tightened. So this chain feels a bit tight. I'm going to loosen it off just a fraction. I'm going to spray a little bit of CRC on all moving parts, including the posts, very important. CRC, W40, anything like that, just don't use grease, because grease will clog and become sticky. So we want to loosen the winch off, wind it all the way down, put it in there. Position your sizer on the scale. And do the same for the other end. CRC, all moving parts. Post. Down. Connect the winch. So just pull it, just pull it. And we're connected. So the next step is making sure everything's smooth, winding it left and right with a hand crank. So when you first put it together, it may not be 100% square. So it may mean that you have to wind it from one side to the other, loosen these two clamps, and you'll see the tubes pre-stress. Stress out of this now. Well, that's pretty good. So it's moved about 5 inches, quarter of an inch. That should free up the movement. We'll just try that. A little bit more CRC on the moving parts. You'd want to do this maybe once a day, just to keep things moving nice and smooth. Stage is installing the carriage, the motor, and the guards blade. In the kit, you'll find the end stops of the beam. You'll want to install one end at least, slide on the carriage, and then install the other end. Locate into the two little holes in the carriage here. That should be all preset. So we've got a washer, spring washer, and a nut on the other side. Swing that over for access. Washer, spring washer, and another nut, and a hex nut here. Same deal, washer, spring washer. Oops, spring washer here, and hex nut. I'm going to tighten them up. Tighten her up. So we'll loosen that right back. We can wind that out of the way. We can take that right out. Really tight. Okay, and the top. Now we do the same to this side over here, but it's the opposite. So this roving knife will come up to the vertical. Okay, yeah. So we spray all the mild steel components with soft seal, so it's like a waxy finish. You really do want to clean that stuff off, your blades and whatever it comes like so that, you know, the blade sits nice and flush. You don't want anything sort of preventing it from sitting flush. There you go. So this is our insert blade right there. So that just positions up onto the hub like that. Hold it steady. Get one screw in there and it won't fall in. It doesn't need to be over tight. Just a little bit of a nip tight in there. And I'd also put soft seal around the heads. Because without that it can be really difficult to get off later on. So soft seal around the heads I find works really well. So we just want to touch tight that. And then the backing nut on the other side you want relatively tight. So we'll tighten these backing nuts on. And again, just a bit of a nip tight. Not too tight. There you go. Alright, so we're going to take these nuts off. The motor has already been fitted, so it should just fit straight back onto these studs. Apply the track brake right there, so it's locked in. I'm going to make sure the belts are lined up with the pulleys there, which they are. And now I'm going to lift this motor up and place it onto the 4 studs. Okay, cool. And then we'll cable tie this on the frame. Chop that off. Cover on. Like so. Locates over there. Line it up. Yes. Now grab the este out of the way. So one push shuts it down, twist it, unlocks it. So a few things about this machine. So to swing the blade, quite simple. Push that lever forward and lock it into its little cone here. Same again, locks into its little cone here. So this is your water supply. The water is used to cool the blade. There's a little arrow there. As long as it's in line with the hose, it's on. 90 degrees to it, it's on. Your track brake, so that'll stop it from rolling as you lift it aside. It's important not to push while it's engaged, because all you're going to do is rip the rubber off there. So you're going to make sure she's off when you're ready to push it. Horizontal sizer. So it's simple as you slide it to that little stop right there, lock your mechanism, and then wind away. And you're lining up this edge to your sizing mark here. So if you want an inch, you stop an inch. Now, it's important to note, if you go too far and you try and wind it back, you may have a slight inconsistency from one end to the other. So you need to work with the chain tension, right? So as you wind it, this side needs to be tensioned and that should be slack. So if you go too far, wind it way back and then try again. And then you'll get accuracy out of your machine. Vertical sizing, you set your kerf at your kerf mark, which is the top line above kerf. You click it once and undo the lock, and you watch your scale go down. So if you're hitting 75 millimeters or 3 inches, I would go beyond 3 inches, maybe 3.5 inches. Put the lock back on and tension up to 3.5 inches. That way the cable is tensioned and it's going to be accurate. If you just lower it down here, as it settles into the click, you're a little bit beyond your mark. So it's always better to lower beyond and then click back up. So again, when it comes to sizing, set it to your kerf mark right here. One click up, loose, and you'll see it's not very tight. So if you want to go, let's say, 3 inches, 3.5 inches, I'd go down, click it back up, and you can put a bit of weight on it. And as you go up to 3.5 inches, it's nice and tight. So as long as that cable's tight, it's right. And if ever there's a point where it feels like it's not going down, just put a bit of body weight there to support it. So before we get a log onto the machine, we want to check over just one fundamental adjustment, and that is the horizontal leader. And it's hardest for our guys in the factory to get this right. So what you need to do, if you've got a flat surface, it's a good double check. So we'll put a level across the concrete if it's nice and flat and level, and we'll measure the blade down to the level on both sides, this side and the side that's under the guard. Because you need to know that on the cutting side of that horizontal blade, it's a slight lead. So this side needs to be up slightly, like 2 mil, and the cutting side needs to be down 2 mil more than the other. So we're going to run this perpendicular to the center of the blade here, and we're going to wind this tooth so it is closest to me here. So we're going to measure that to the bottom of the tooth, and we are 291 millimeters. And we'll rotate that tooth to the other side. Over here, we are 306. So we've got quite a lead. So we can correct that here right now. To adjust that, it's just a matter of bringing this out a few mil, maybe 5 mil, and the cone to suit. So effectively we're bringing both the cone and the stopper out about that much so that it's more level. So we'll adjust this out a little bit, and I can bring that up so it comes to the stopper right there without adjusting the cone just yet, and I'll remeasure. So now we are 297 millimeters. That was 297, and we're 293. Pretty close, but still a little excessive. So I'll bring that out just a little bit more, down there, and I think I'd be pretty happy with that. Lock it back, and we'll adjust the cone to suit. So we swing that back up. It's not going to go on its cone, so let's adjust that out a bit. It needs to pop into its cone, nice and easy like that. Lock it up. That's better. Okay, let's check again. So we are 294 millimeters, and bring this tube over this side, and we are 296 millimeters. So there's one more adjustment we need to check, and we'll swing this into the vertical. So first thing you need to do, this is the intersect, so that your boards come off, cut and square. So you measure here, 294 millimeters. Swing it to the vertical, and basically, if you lower this tooth to its lowest point, should be 2 millimeters higher than the earlier adjustment. So 294 millimeters, that should be 296. So we're 294. So this blade needs to go up a couple of millimeters. It's these two here. So when that blade swings up to its vertical position, it hits a stop, and then it pops into its cone, right? So if we want that blade to go up 2 millimeters, these two need to go down 2 millimeters. Right, so all I'm going to do is loosen these two nuts here and drop that down 2 millimeters. So it raises the blade up 2 millimeters. It's as if you're dealing with two blades. So if you move anything to the bottom position, the top position has to follow. So it's like a 90-degree pivot. And then just make sure that cone is going to lock itself without being too loose. You can't sort of chatter in the cut, so it needs to be a nice snug fit. which it is. So you're left with a toolbox, and in that you'll have a sharpener kit, a tool for removing the teeth, switching the teeth out, the dressing stone that comes with your sharpening kit, set of extra teeth, a hat, a couple of manuals, so you get the actual mill manual and the motor manual, and a few cable ties to route your e-stop cable and your water line. Right, so we're going to bring a little log in here, and we're going to just go through the fine-tuning of the machine and just a few principles of operation. This is the log bunk that we're going to use. Now, you need it to be around 7 inches wide, maybe 2 inches deep, but this is way too small. So you need about a 10 by 10 block as a bunk, which is ideal. If you're dealing with small logs, it's your bunk that's going to move, not your log. So you need these to be quite substantial, and you also need them to be higher than your base skids. So when you write down, you can get every little bit of the log out. So you'll need to check a couple of things. One is that your beam is running parallel to the log. Now you can correct that just simply by sliding the frame a little bit left or right. Quite often do that when you're on site. And the next thing is to align the beam running through to the center of the hut vertically as well. So just look down this way and then slide that with the log. Really this end can come down just a tad. That's about it there. So we've just set the blade at its starting point. So I'm going to go as close to the top, and I'm trying to find a big enough surface area there to recover my first board. So you can check both positions, so you can make sure you're this way far enough. And until we get the adjustments all dialed in, you'll do smaller cuts until that log's opened. So we do fill the oil in the gearbox. It's marked with a little line here to say it's done. But it wouldn't harm to just double check that there is oil in that gearbox. Basically, we fill it on the other side hole over here, and we fill it to a point where the oil just drips down with the bung open. So that tells us it's halfway full. So that's the filling point right here. And when the blade's in horizontal here, you just let the oil spill out until it's half full. So the oil and the motor is already pre-filled at the shop, but once again, just double check that. So we'll put some fuel in the machine. Install the water. Choke on, like this. Make sure the C-stop's off. So with the manual machine, you're pretty much always going to start with the horizontal and then finish with the vertical. And that, the reason behind that is the controls is at this end. So horizontal first, vertical second. And again, until we get it dialed in, we'll do some small cuts, like 2 inch, 2 inch, 2 inch, until that log's up and we can see what that blade's doing. things, or three things actually. That the horizontal cut is giving back score marks. So ideally what you need to see is crisscross both directions, the front score marks as well as the back score marks. The vertical looks pretty good. It's scoring both directions. This is obviously really a punky log. It's got fur everywhere. We are getting a little bit of crisscross here, and the boards are coming off clean. So our little pre-adjustment really sorted a few things out here. So we'll keep cutting. We'll open that top log off, and then we'll drop it down probably 1 inch so we can conserve our log a little bit. So at this point, I can check two adjustments. The first one I need to check is I go through with a small little 2-inch skim cut here. I come back, and then I'm over another 2-inch skim cut. And between the two, you should see just visible a little score mark, which is the transition point. Not too heavy, and just visible. So a 2-inch skim here, come back, 2-inch skim there. And that'll tell me that the lead-in, this side, is just right. And we measured it on the floor, and it was 2 mil. So I'm thinking that we've got it pretty well meted out. So what I'll do is I'm going to lower the winch 1 click, and I come back and I'm going to go 2-inch, come back, 2-inch. And just to verify that there is a lead on it, right? So if there wasn't a lead on it, the blade would kind of, this will be high and that'll be low, and as you move across, it'll ram into the log, and you'll burn the blade, you'll cut the blade, you'll do all sorts of nasties. So you don't want it like this. You want it slightly like that with a 2 mil gap there, and we showed that a little bit earlier on. And the other thing that I'm checking for is when I've got an open slab like this, is I run the full blade horizontally over it, and I should see front and back score marks, right? And at the moment, we're getting a little bit of front score marks here, but predominantly it's all back score marks. So that means the blade is coming through slightly at an angle. So the front of the blade, this side, is slightly higher than the back side. It's actually scraping like this. It's not so bad that when you get off the log, you come back at, resaws and throw sawdust. It's pretty flat, so the guys have done a reasonable job getting it leveled. But you should be able to see the crisscross. But we'll come to that later. reduced again, and now we're seeing a lot more equal score marks. You're getting a lot of front score marks as well as back score marks. So we've got that quite close. I mean, you could be fussy and go a little bit more so that you're getting, you know, consistency all the way through. But we're so close that I'm happy with that. So the next stage, so we've crossed off 2 adjustments. We've done the lead in, and we've also adjusted the forward and back tilt. So the next adjustment would be the vertical cut. So the same thing. The vertical needs to cut straight. So if the blade's out, you'll end up cutting wedges. So and that's a real telltale sign. One is as you get through the cut, and as you come out of the log, it goes zing, and it sprays sawdust. And as you come back into it, it sprays sawdust, right? So that's problem 1. Problem 2 is if you're seeing wedges. Like if one end is thicker than the other, it's not your mill, it's your blade. The blade is trying to rise up. So it's not like air. Timber is very dense, and if the blade is slightly out, it's going to carry in that direction until the blade gets hot, and ultimately until you get out where it goes twang. So it needs to go in and out, nice and smooth, and you should see a nice crisscross. So what we're going to do is we're going to show you how to do a wide 6-inch cut horizontal board right here. And we'll do that a few times all the way down until we get to a point where we can at least cut maybe a 4 or 5-inch so we can see what that vertical blade does in the cut. So that'll be the third adjustment. So we're going to lower it down 1 inch here. And remember, you set that to your curve mark right here. When you click it, holding the handle firmly, and you wind it down beyond that inch, and you click back up to the inch mark. Up here, the same applies down this end. There's no weight down here, so you're probably going to have to put a bit of a body force on it. And click, wind it down, and click back up to an inch. Wind the machine back over so that you're only doing a shallow 2-inch entry cut. That's typical. That's another thing, is try not to do deep horizontal cuts. You might get away with it, you know, a couple of times, but ultimately gravity is going to have an effect, and it's going to want to bog down. So your blade's going to get hot, and it's going to want to rise down. So the best way by far is when you're doing wide horizontal cuts to take them in 2 passes. Especially when skimming across a wide slab. What actually happens if you try and go too deep, the whole face of the blade picks up on knots and so on. So it's a far more accurate way to skim the log in 2-inch runs. So this is your sharpener kit. So it comes with a little pin there, and basically that sleeves over the tooth and locates onto tooth there, pops through that hole, and this here is a dressing stone. So when you've done a bunch of sharpens and it starts to gloss over, you just touch that face there quickly. So you just need a drill, and lock it on there, and it's pretty simple. Slow speed. That's all it needs. It's done the tip, so pop that off, wind that around, pop her in there again. Pretty basic. It's got a little ball bearing that pops into that hole. It's only 5 teeth, it's not like a bandsaw. You do have to line that hole up out first. We used to have a little bracket that would sharpen it on the blade, but this is much better as a guide. all done. Sharpened. So we're about to make a 6-inch horizontal cut. So to set your size up, you bring that to your curve mark right there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to wind it over maybe a 2-inch, 1.5 inch, whatever. To start with, I'll run down a 2-inch, I'll come back, and then I'll move it over to my 6-inch, 150. And as I enter the log, to stop any sort of bounce, I've got that little roller that I can slide on and it'll roll against the face of the edge of the board. So we'll just wind that over to, let's say, 1.5 inches. So you can see again, you're seeing front and back score marks horizontally, which is exactly what you want. So the horizontal blade and its leaded is adjusted very well. So at this point, we've got enough face here to actually drop it down, maybe 4-inch, so that we can actually see what that vertical blade's doing. So what I'll do is I'll lower it 4 inches at each end, and we'll do a series of vertical cuts. And I'm going to be watching for how that blade enters the cut, how it feels. You should be able to just fly through that cut, and how it exits the log. And what I quite often do is I look at the corner of the cut at each end. Always that end, the corner of the cut is going to be perfect. But if the blade is out, as you graduate down to this end, you'll see a larger square than the corner here than over there, or a wedge board at this end. And that tells me the blade is wandering either left or right. So you want that blade to come out straight, perfectly, no sound, and you should be able to drive it back into the cut. And again, watching the corner transition point. If you see a square that's maybe 2 by 2 millimeters at that end, and then maybe 5 by 2 millimeters at this end, that means the blade's wandering. So that's when we have to adjust that blade true. So I'll lower it 4 inches and we'll do some cuts. And generally speaking, with this machine, the strength is always in the vertical cut. So you'll be able to fly through there with a full depth cut in the vertical without any sort of vibration. And the reason being, the blade is parked up in the vertical directly by that beam. It's probably a butt log of some sort, but as you get into the heart, it's going to become a lot smoother. But as you can see, you're getting good crisscross all the way down the log right here. So, and the blade's not making any funny noises. Now, to me, that's adjusted pretty well. But as you go deeper, let's say 6 inch or 8 inch or whatever model you may have, that's when you start seeing problems because it really shows up if the blade's out and those deep cuts. So when you are testing for the vertical cut, I'd start out with a 4 inch, then drop it down to a 6 inch in increments, so you don't heat up the blade. But for now, that looks pretty good. So I'll carry on cutting some vertical boards here, but I'll just point out how we do that adjustment, how we correct that blade in the vertical. So we didn't have to adjust anything because it's pretty well adjusted. But if I want to move this blade and correct that tilt left and right, all I do is loosen the half nut here. It's sandwiched against this plate here, and it needs to be sandwiched against that plate, so it prevents the bolt from rolling inside its axes. So loosen that hex nut there, the big one, and then we can push and pull that little adjuster, which will change the blade angle here. So if I wanted that blade to lead more that way, I would loosen this one and wind this one. You can see, you can put your finger here as you adjust it, and this thing will move left and right. So that's how you do your vertical blade alignment. And really the last adjustment is the intersect. That's when the blade cuts this way, and it comes back and cuts that way, right? So what we'll do is we'll show you that little V section of the cut that we're talking about. So you should see a little tiny square right at the bottom of each cut, and from one end to the other, it looks pretty. You know, it's the same from one end to the other. So again, if this is wider at this end and narrower at the other end, it means your blade's not quite aligned. But we're getting crisscross. It comes out of the cut nicely, and yeah. So going back to the intersect. The last adjustment is basically where that vertical blade sits. So when you swing the blade up into the vertical, it locks into its little mushroom thing. By lowering the bolt and the mushroom over here, we'll raise that blade up. By raising that up, it'll tilt the blade down. So that is So that vertical intersect are these two bolts here. So that's the last adjustment. So you want your timber to cut free, but you don't want to draw lines in the top of your slab. So when you swing it into vertical, it's simply a matter of raising and lowering where that stops, which will change your intersect points. Sometimes if the blade is way up, it looks like it's so far out that it's not going to cut, but until you lower that blade down, it closes the gap. And really, that's one thing unique about our swing blades, is we don't rely on an plastic axis. Our axis is actually the shaft of the gearbox, so it guarantees that your intersect point will always be right. So at this point, I'm just going to lower another 2 inches so we can see what a 6-inch cut does, and just check that vertical adjustment is still right. So I'll lower 2 inches without the curve. So again, we've just dropped it to 6 inches, and it comes out of the cut nice and smooth. We're getting good crisscross. So the guys out of the shop adjusted that really well. I'm checking the little square section in the middle, and it's consistent all the way through. So we're good. Just to go over a few things with the machine, we have one grease point right here, and that needs to be greased regularly, maybe once a day. That's your axis push right there. So in the whole machine, it's pretty much just one grease point. As far as all the bearings are concerned, there's no need to grease them. SKF have said it's good for the life of the saw, and really by greasing the bearings, you're just more likely to contaminate the grease inside there. So best not to grease anything there. Just one grease point right here on the axis bush. The gearbox oil is 80W90, standard gear oil, and it should be filled half full. I'd say maybe after 50 hours, drain it over here and put some new oil in there. But you do need to regularly just make sure that you've got oil in there. It's half full. The gearbox is loud, it's very noisy, but it's very robust, and we've had almost no issues with that particular gearbox. The brake, just make sure you don't push it while it's engaged, because you're just going to rip the rubber, so just be careful with that one. As far as the pivot mechanism is concerned, just a little bit of WD-40 or grease in around the moving parts is always a good idea. This is your belt tension. You need to loosen up these nuts, and you can wind the belt up. You can actually feel the belt tension in there. You don't want to over tighten it, obviously, but you need enough drive on it. A couple of things to check for are these little rollers here. Maybe after 200, 300 hours, they'll need replacing. Another thing is just make sure this is on a slot here. So both rollers should be rolling. So make sure that they're adjusted correctly. Just loosen them, slide them against that slot, and lock it up. Water is very important. It just keeps the blade clean, keeps all the pitch away from the teeth. You'd probably get around 20, 30 sharpens out of each tungsten bit. And to remove the tungsten bits, what I do is I lay this blade on the surface of the log, say halfway through the log, and then I just punch those little grub screws that come standard in there out with a little punch, and use the tool to remove it. So yeah, I wouldn't even bother using a little Allen key to try and get that out. I'd just knock it out with a punch against some timber. You can do that on the saw, but the swing blades operate at a much higher RPM than the typical old school circular saws. So we do require that grub screw in there as a safety point of view.